Hey guys, welcome to Entertainment Talk Nation. This is Rob. This video, we're going to do our review for episode 2 of Arrow, entitled The Recruits, and we're going to touch a little bit upon episode 1 as well, since I didn't get to do that review last week, since I was under the weather. And we're going to start there very briefly, and then we'll talk about episode 2. So in terms of episode 1, I overall, I was okay with it. It wasn't the best premiere for Arrow out of the 5 seasons. It wasn't as exciting as some of the other premieres. It was I think deliberately, very slow moving. We saw a couple of things in, like, obviously Oliver having a hard time coping with the fact that he doesn't have his team anymore. Thea reluctantly went out to help Oliver at some point in the episode, even though she was expressed that she was very happy with her life outside of that lifeline. And we saw that Felicity has a new man living in Oliver and Thea's old place. It's just weird. And so it was an okay episode. It was okay. And we've obviously seen throughout all the premieres and all that he was going to begin to form a new team. One of the characters is someone we hadn't seen before, while the other two we have seen, and obviously Curtis being one of them, and then the young lady who portrayed herself to be the Canary. So episode 1 I thought was okay. It wasn't as good as I was hoping it would be, and I think one of the more, I don't want to say disappointing, but something that's kind of starting to get a little bit tiresome is we find out at the end of episode 1 that there is yet another villain with a bow and arrow. And this is kind of getting to the point now where it's getting a little tiresome. Everybody has a freaking bow and arrow. We obviously know Merlin has one when he's around. And, these other characters, Thea, obviously, Roy, before he left, had a bow and arrow. The other girl, Ra's al Ghul's daughter, whose name escapes me at the moment, had a bow and arrow. So now we have another villain with a bow and arrow. So, the thing I liked about last season was Damien Dark was one of the better villains the show's had since Deathstroke, and I would like these villains without bow and arrows to continue. But be that as it may, we now find out here in episode 2, and I'll start episode 2 now, that Prometheus is obviously focused on getting Oliver to the point that he even threatened to kill Church if Church ends up killing Green Arrow in his travels trying to take over the city. Now, episode 2, I felt was a lot better. We got to see him recruit these new members, and he gives them very much a lot of tough love in the early going, and it seems to have a negative effect. They do actually hit the field with him on a very minor scale, watching the perimeter of an event that he had some investors come to, investors that were reluctant to show up because of the threat that was, excuse me, because of the threat that was given by Ragman, who we'll talk about a little later. Thank you for that, by the way, Jim Kelly. So yeah, I thought it was a lot better of an episode. Really picked up the pace a little bit from the first episode, but we see that obviously his recruits aren't ready, and not only they're not ready, but they're not trusting or respecting Oliver because of his approach, because he's concealing his identity. And the thing of it is, here's my little bit of a criticism here. Like, I don't actually blame him for keeping his identity. You understand what I mean by in the very outset? Like, I see it from both sides. It's kind of a double-edged sword from a storytelling perspective, because on one hand, yes, it makes sense that if you're going to recruit people and you're going to bring them in, you got to open the door to trust. You kind of got to take a leap of faith and trust right away if you're going to be able to work as a cohesive team, and if you're going to gain their trust in your training methods. On the flip side of that, can you really trust people that much? Not really, because he could have started off doing it the right way, show his identity, train some of these people up to their fullest potential, and then one of them can bail and just turn on him and become a villain that can challenge him because he knows all his secrets. So, it's a tough approach. I think from a story perspective, they probably took the right approach, starting him off that way, and then having him kind of, break down the walls a little bit. I think it's the right approach. I just think maybe it was a little bit too soon. I think maybe you should take another episode or two before they actually know who Oliver is. The other thing is, I thought it was really weird that his first training session with them, or the first time meeting with them, was actually in his headquarters. I thought that to be extremely weird. You know, I would think that if you're going to be bringing these people here for the first time, outside of Curtis, of course, and mainly for Wild Dog, since the other girl has some experience with Oliver, I would think that you would find a neutral place where you could at least maybe have a discussion with them first instead of running right into training and having them try to hit this bell. The other thing I didn't like too, I liked and disliked. So Felicity at some point cut him off during his conversation of trying to explain this practice to the new recruits about hitting the bell and the purpose of the drill. And I think she brings up a good point when she's talking to him, but it was what she went through to get his attention. The fact that she's yelling at him and stuff. I'm like thinking to myself, wow, that's kind of undermining the leader, so to speak, while he has new recruits, And so I thought that was kind of out of character for Oliver to tolerate that. And at the same time, I just think Felicity sometimes kind of just steps out of her, bounds a little bit. Like she could have just easily grabbed him and said, look, we really need to talk. And Oliver will respond. Oliver responds to Felicity. I'm sure still loves her. I think he's over it, but I think obviously he respects her and loves her enough that he would have listened. Now this Ragman was an interesting character. This to me, and again, I don't read. I try to stay away from spoilers during the off season because I like to be surprised. This was a surprise to me because this was a character I didn't expect to see. I knew about Church. We knew about Prometheus. We knew about these recruits. So for me personally, Ragman was surprising to see. I didn't know who he was at first. I found out he was Ragman through speaking with Jim from The Nation. I was like, Jim, who the fuck was that? And because I know they were calling him that on the show, but I didn't think that seriously was going to be his name. And it's funny, the first moment I saw him, I said, oh man, is that Scarecrow? And that's no, it's not Scarecrow. But that's the first thing that hit me in the head when I saw him was, wow, it looks like Scarecrow, like a different version of him. But then when you see the wraps flying and all that, I thought to myself, all right, well, that's not Scarecrow. Maybe it's the Mummy, But either way, it seems to be a pretty cool character, a character that looks like, based on the coming attractions, is going to join the team. So if nothing else, at least Oliver is going to have one person on the team, whether this guy stays around or not. He's going to have one person on the team that has at least some experience. So I think it's going to be interesting to see how this is going to work out with with these new recruits. Now, the interesting thing too is you also get a very big hunch in this episode that Diggle will be making his return eventually. We see that he went on a mission, and turns out the mission was dirty. His commanding officer is trying to make a profit, sacrifice some of his own soldiers, and even frame Diggle, killing one of these soldiers, so that Diggle can sign off on a report that kind of coincides with the story that he's telling, so that way he can get away with doing this heist. Diggle obviously is not going for it, and I think it's a matter of time before Diggle either escapes the situation on his own or somehow contacts Oliver, and Oliver goes out to help him and bring him back to the city. One of those two things is going to happen, but eventually Diggle is going to come back. I think it's pretty obvious. I don't think Diggle will be, if all these characters are going to leave, that's fine. I think Diggle will be the one to ultimately stay. I always thought about that even after he left. And now we're going to see that in a couple of episodes, he'll be making his return, and he'll definitely play a pivotal role in training these new recruits. So I think Oliver, but I think he'll take a more backseat approach. He'll be kind of like Felicity. He'll stay in the headquarters, facilitate, help train, stuff like that, and leave the dirty work to Oliver and his new team. I'm sure he'll hit the field every now and then when it's absolutely necessary, kind of like what Thea did. But for the most part, I think he's going to take a hands-off approach. And you know what? I don't mind that. I kind of like Diggle in the background facilitating. I mean, he's got military experience. He can help them come up with game plans and stuff like that. And then he can call the shots through the mic and with the cameras from the headquarters with the help of Felicity hacking systems and shit like that. So I see where they're going with this. I see that the pace they're going for is very deliberate, and that's okay because I think I'm starting to see the light at the end of the tunnel here. The other thing I wanted to mention before I end this video, and this is going back to episode 1, another thing that bothered me was it bothered me and it didn't. So see again a conflicting feeling. One hand was Oliver killing, and while I don't mind murder Oliver, and I don't. That's one of the awesome things about the first 2 seasons. It's hard for me to believe that he would so easily go back to doing that after the hard work he put into himself to try and not kill people, especially after what happened to Tommy and things like that. So I don't know if that's a theme that's going to continue. Obviously, we didn't see it here. I don't know if that's a theme that's going to continue. But if they're going to continue with that, I really do think they need to find a better reason as to why he's going to revert to that, as opposed to just doing it out of nowhere. I don't think he will. I think with Felicity still there and with Diggle eventually coming back, I don't think Oliver is going to revert to that. Plus Thea gave him hell about it in episode 1. So, but overall, episode 1 wasn't too crazy about. Episode 2, I liked a lot better. And I'm looking forward to seeing how these recruits are going to work out. The Ragman, also Prometheus, even though I'm tired of villains that have bows and arrows. We know the 2 best villains, in my opinion, didn't have them, which was obviously Deathstroke and Deathstroke, and I just mentioned his name earlier. But those 2 villains obviously did not have a bow and arrow. Ra's al Ghul could use a bow and arrow. He was also very good with a sword. And Damien Dark, of course, is the name that slipped my mind for the moment. But again, a lot of his team, referring to Ra's al Ghul, had bows and arrows. His daughter had a bow and arrow. Malcolm Merlin, who was the villain in season 1 for the most part, had a bow and arrow. So, but we'll see. This guy looks pretty badass. He's obviously after Arrow, and we'll see how that turns out. But overall, I thought episode 2 was a lot better than episode 1, and very interesting to see how Flashpoint is going to affect Arrow, knowing now that John Diggle, according to Flash, the Flash show, has a son. So I'm dying to see his son on the Arrow show, and whether or not he's still with his wife, because we have not seen her once. So, but anyway, guys, that's it for this review. We'll return next week with our review of episode 3 for Arrow, and see how this all comes together in the weeks to come. So take it easy, and I'll see you next video.